Among his secret lovers was a man half his age. But who was he? Burt Lancaster, the Oscar-winning icon of Hollywood's golden age, lived a double life, displaying strength and masculinity on screen, but hiding forbidden passions. Behind closed doors, he risked everything for affairs that could have ended his career overnight. One particular affair, shocking, tender, and dangerously unbalanced, remains the most haunting chapter of his secret life. Hollywood in the late 1940s. The city of dazzling neon signs, the clatter of film reels, the posters glowing across Sunset Boulevard. It was called the Golden Age of American cinema, a place where every dream could come true. Yet, behind the glittering red carpets and flashing bulbs lay a darker reality. Closed doors, secret contracts, and carefully crafted illusions. This was an era where every star had to maintain a spotless image, and even the faintest crack could bring down an entire career. Into this world stepped Burt Lancaster, like a storm. From a working-class boy in New York to a circus acrobat, and then to the silver screen, he carried with him piercing eyes, a towering physique, and a magnetic presence. Within only a few years, Lancaster became one of Hollywood's brightest stars. His breakthrough in The Killers, 1946, turned him overnight from an unknown athlete into a leading man. With his haunting portrayal of a doomed boxer, he announced to the world that he was not just handsome muscle, but a true actor of depth. Follow-up roles in Brute Force, 1947, and Sorry, Wrong Number, 1948, cemented his reputation as a performer unafraid to explore darkness, violence, and vulnerability. He embodied masculinity, strength, and danger, the exact archetype the industry wanted to sell to audiences. And yet, beneath the brilliance, Lancaster carried a secret only his closest confidants knew: his hidden loves with men. In a society that treated homosexuality as a crime, in an industry where a scandal could erase decades of work, he loved, quietly, tremblingly, sometimes despairingly. What makes his story extraordinary is not simply the rumors of who he loved, but the way he lived two lives at once. On screen, he was fearless, charging into danger without hesitation. Off-screen, he was a man forced to glance over his shoulder, constantly wary of watchful eyes, living between desire and fear. It was a cruel paradox. The more heroic his characters became on film, the more cautious he was forced to be in real life. In 1940s Hollywood, studios wielded frightening control over their stars' private lives. Public images were manufactured: who an actor dated, who they were seen with, even what stories appeared in magazines. Some stars were forced into sham marriages to protect the facade. To be exposed as gay was not just humiliating, it was the end. Thus, love between men became something relegated to whispers, hotel rooms under false names, and fleeting weekends behind locked doors. The same Lancaster who dazzled millions as a man of action in Kiss the Blood Off My Hands, 1948, or All My Sons, 1948, was privately navigating a minefield where even affection could destroy him. For Lancaster, love was like the tightrope act of his youth, thrilling, dangerous, and always on the verge of collapse. Just as he performed his own stunts on film, he took risks in love, knowing the fall could be fatal, but unable to resist the leap. His circus past had taught him how to leap without hesitation, but it had never prepared him for the fear of being caught in a world that refused to accept who he truly was. Perhaps this duality gave him his power as an actor. Audiences saw a man who could embody rugged outlaws, tortured heroes, and complex rebels. What they didn't see was the personal torment behind those fiery eyes, the secrets that weighed heavily with every role. The intensity he poured into characters, the fury, the longing, the heartbreak, often came from a well of emotions he could not express in his own life. And then one night, at a glittering Beverly Hills party, under golden lights reflected in crystal glasses, as a jazz band played softly in the background, Lancaster saw Cary Grant, the most elegant man in Hollywood, another symbol of perfection. Their eyes met across the room, a moment so brief it might have gone unnoticed by everyone else. But for Lancaster, it was the spark that would ignite a hidden chapter of love. Sweet, dangerous, and carefully veiled. That was where the true story began. It all began with a glimpse, fleeting but exhilarating, at a party where the room seemed to glow more gold than light. Beverly Hills, 1948. The place was Ciro's, the nightclub where every last star would drop by, a stage as glamorous as any screen. Waiters threaded their way between tables with trays of champagne, chandeliers sparkled like diamonds. In the corner of the room, a jazz trio was grooving to Stardust, and the air was thick with the scent of movie deals, gossip, and ambition. Burt Lancaster, still glowing from the success of The Killers, was shaking hands with producers when his eyes caught him across the room. There, in the flickering light, was Cary Grant, charm personified, smile perfectly practiced, tuxedo immaculate. Their eyes met, and at that moment, the noise died away. To others, it was nothing, one star welcoming another. But to Lancaster, it was as if a door had opened quietly amid the noise. Cary Grant stared back with a fierce gaze, stripping away his famous veneer. And for a brief moment, both men felt undone. Over the next few weeks, they crossed paths at movie premieres and studio dinners, always at ease, always in public, always under close scrutiny. But beneath the polite exchanges ran a dangerous undercurrent. Hollywood knew how to stage appearances. Lancaster was the new man of toughness, Grant the eternal gentleman. But beneath the surface, both men recognized something deeper. What the world required them to hide, they saw reflected in each other. Soon, champagne parties gave way to secret weekends. Lancaster would drive down the Pacific Coast Highway, headlights blazing in the darkness, to a secluded beach house in Malibu. As he got closer, his heart would beat faster. Not because of the road, but because he knew that for a few days he could let go of his armor. In that house, Cary Grant was not the suave bachelor the magazines loved. He was the man who laughed as he toasted bread, who lounged barefoot with the newspaper, who sat silently beside Burt as the waves lapped at the shore. Lancaster, who had often been portrayed as invincible, whether as the hardened prisoner in Brute Force or the desperate husband in Sorry, Wrong Number, found himself exposed in a way no script could have asked for. There, they lived in fragments of freedom. They talked about movies, books, or nothing at all. They cooked, they drank wine, they swam in the moonlight. For a few hours, the masks of Hollywood were laid aside like costumes left behind. But even in those tender moments, darkness crept in. Every furtive laugh carried the weight of things that could never be. Cary Grant had long since learned the price of exposure. The years of rumored affairs with Randolph Scott had nearly turned his career upside down, and the studios had stepped up, putting him in elaborate love affairs with actresses to quell the gossip. His charm was his empire, and a whisper could topple it. For Grant, concealment was survival. For Lancaster, the danger was different, but equally oppressive. He was still on the rise, his reputation not yet fully established. A scandal would mean not only the loss of roles, but the loss of the very respect he had fought to earn. And so their love became a paradox. Passionate yet cautious, passionate yet fragile. Every moment of intimacy carried with it the fear of discovery. And it was this contradiction that Lancaster captured on screen. Critics marveled at the raw power of his performance, his eyes seemingly burning with desire and fury. They never knew that behind those eyes was a man struggling with a love that could never come to light. The end came not in a storm, but in silence. Grant, cautious to the core, began to retreat behind the walls he had built. The fortress closed in, brick by brick, until Lancaster found himself on the outside. He did not fight it, he knew that Grant's caution was stronger than their bond. Love in their world was never built to last. It was built to survive, and survival often meant sacrifice. When it ended, no words, no farewell letters were found decades later. Only a scar, invisible to the world but etched in Lancaster's memory. Years later, he quietly confessed to a friend, "Cary taught me that even love in Hollywood requires a mask." But from that silence, a beginning came. The affair with Cary Grant was not just a love story. It was the opening act of a story that would last decades. It taught Lancaster that passion could be both salvation and danger. That secrecy was the price one had to pay for tenderness. It showed him that his truest life would not be in premieres or headlines, but in whispers, in shadows, in carefully stolen hours. For the audience, the lesson was not just about love. It was about the weight of silence. The glamour of Hollywood demands perfection, but behind the glamour lies the loneliness of men forced to love in the dark. Lancaster and Grant's story is tender, yes, but also a reminder of the cruel trade-offs every star must make. To protect their careers, their hearts must wear a mask. But life in Hollywood never stops. One chapter quietly moves into the next, like a movie that never stops rolling. Lancaster bears the scars of that love, hidden but still vivid, as he moves forward. And what awaits him is not another actor, not another secret love born under the California sun, but a far more dangerous relationship, one laced with power, secrets, and fear. The next name in his hidden story is not a movie star, but the most formidable figure in Washington, J. Edgar Hoover. The silence Cary Grant left behind did not last long. The Hollywood movies kept rolling, and Burt Lancaster, bearing the silent wounds of that secret love affair, soon found himself drawn into a new chapter. A chapter darker, stranger, and far more dangerous. If Grant was the epitome of gentleness, this next entanglement was the epitome of fear. For the man waiting in the shadows was not another actor bound by studio contract, but the most powerful policeman in America, J. Edgar Hoover. It was the late 1950s, and the contrast could not have been starker. One man, Lancaster, was the face of the screen. Daring, charismatic, the star who had made the leap from circus to stardom with The Killers, now establishing himself as a serious actor and producer. The other, Hoover, was the untouchable force in Washington, the iron fist of the FBI, a figure who stalked American life with dossiers, wiretaps, and whispered threats. Lancaster was admired for his stature, his passion, and his willingness to take risks. Hoover was feared by presidents for his secrets. Together, they were an unlikely couple, their relationship born not of love but of something far stranger. A shared life hidden under a mask. They met at a Washington charity gala, a glamorous evening where politicians met Hollywood elites. Lancaster was both a guest and a performer, the Oscar-winning actor now using his celebrity to speak out on social issues. Hoover, as always, was there as a sentinel, the embodiment of order, the guardian of American morality, in public at least. Amid the polite introductions and carefully staged photographs, Lancaster felt the unmistakable pull of recognition. Hoover's eyes were sharp, searching, but behind them there was a haunting loneliness that Burt had seen in other men like him. But Hoover was no Cary Grant. There was no tenderness in this relationship. Theirs was conducted in whispers and caution, in meetings shrouded in secrecy, feeling more like negotiation than passion. Hoover was a man afraid of himself, a man who held power over others precisely because he had no control over his own truth. He had Clyde Tolson by his side, his rumored companion, his loyal deputy, but he craved the fleeting intimacy that a man like Lancaster, bold and powerful, could provide. And Lancaster, always curious about the secret lives of men who wore masks like armor, joined him in the shadows. It wasn't love in the tender, furtive weekend sense. It was something fragile, an exchange born of fear and need. Lancaster later described Hoover in private as a man who desires intimacy but fears his own reflection. Their relationship was tense, yes, but also stifling. Where Cary Grant was warm and restrained, Hoover was controlling and paranoid. Each encounter carried the weight of danger, not just of scandal, but of what Hoover represented. A man who could destroy reputations with a single file, who could bury his enemies under suspicion all by himself. The timing of their encounter, however, was telling. This was a period when Lancaster was building his production company, Hecht Hill Lancaster, with Harold Hecht and James Hill. He had begun to champion films that dared to defy convention. Marty, 1955, a modest tale of loneliness and love, won the Academy Award for Best Picture, proof that cinema could be about ordinary people, not just spectacle. Separate Tables, 1958, tackled themes of oppression, scandal, and human frailty, ideas that Hollywood often preferred to bury. Lancaster was seeking truth on screen, truth that resonated with audiences. Hoover, on the other hand, was doing everything in his power to conceal the truths that threatened the image of America he had built. Theirs was a strange collision. The actor wanted to reveal, and the FBI director wanted to conceal. For Lancaster, these encounters were unsettling. He entered them perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of a desperate desire for connection, but was met with emptiness. Hoover was not a lover, he was a consumer, borrowing intimacy like he borrowed loyalty, never reciprocating. Lancaster left these encounters feeling cold, as if he had glimpsed not romance but a prison of fear. It was a stark reminder that secrecy, when bound by power, can be more corrosive than liberating. When it ended as quietly as it had begun. No tears, no nostalgia, no lingering tenderness. Hoover returned to his fortress of files and shadows. Lancaster, restless, returned to the screen, to the work that had given him freedom even as his private life remained constrained. What he took with him from Hoover was not a warm memory but the trace of a scar, a rugged line cut by proximity to power, by intimacy tinged with paranoia. But the scar also became part of his hidden history. It revealed a truth Lancaster could never ignore, that there are men who are destroyed not by the cruelty of society, but by their own rejection. Hoover's life is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the damage that fear can do when it obscures love. For Lancaster, the lesson was sharp. It is better to suffer in silence than to be trapped in the cage of rejection. And then he moved on. It was the plaster corridors of Washington and back to the glamour of Hollywood, to mend a bond shaped by power and paranoia toward something gentler, more human. The next chapter in his secret life will not be about dominance or control, but about desire, the fragile tenderness between two men trapped in roles they never chose. This time, it will be with Rock Hudson, the screen's most handsome leading man, and perhaps the most vulnerable of them all. As we close this page, let me ask you one thing. If you were Lancaster, would you choose silence or risk everything for love? And while you're pondering that, I'd love to know, where are you watching this story tonight? What country? What corner of the world? Share in the comments below. We'll read it all and be happy to respond. After the cold, stuffy corridors of Washington and the shadowy figure of J. Edgar Hoover, Lancaster's life returned to warmth. From the overwhelming fear, he was drawn into something lighter, something that, for fleeting moments, felt like freedom. And it began not in a hall of power, but in the blazing sun of the American desert. The desert stretched out before them, endless and tanned, a landscape that seemed to swallow up every secret. Burt Lancaster gripped the wheel of the convertible, the hot wind blowing through his hair, while Rock Hudson leaned back in the passenger seat, his laughter carried away by the rushing wind. For a moment, there were no cameras, no contracts, no studio managers watching from the shadows, just the two men, free under the vast western sky. These desert treks became their sanctuary, a portable cocoon where they could finally breathe as themselves. By all accounts, Hudson was the most handsome man in Hollywood. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile that seemed divinely crafted, he was the industry's ideal of masculine perfection. But behind that image was a man trapped. The studio system had locked him in, manufacturing romances to promote him, arranging appearances with actresses to reinforce his image of the perfect leading man. Hudson carried the burden of expectations, knowing that a single truth, if revealed, would destroy everything he had built. Lancaster, by contrast, had always been more defiant. He had challenged Hollywood's rules by starting his own production company, by pursuing projects like Marty and Separate Tables, films that told honest, hard-hitting stories. He had shown the world that he was more than a swordsman with a square jaw. Yet even he, a daring acrobat, could not defy the unspoken rule of silence in love. He wanted a long-term relationship, something more than secret weekends and desert road trips, but he knew that time had not come and probably never would. Their love was tender, fragile, and fleeting, like wind across the desert, impossible to hold, gone in an instant. They found joy in small rituals, cooking together in quiet kitchens, sneaking away from studio backlots to share a meal without handlers nearby. Long conversations about the absurdities of their industry, about books, about the families they could never truly build in the open. To Lancaster, Hudson was a gentle soul inside a gladiator's body, a man whose eyes revealed a longing he rarely dared to speak aloud. But the tenderness was always shadowed by fear. Hudson lived under the strictest control, his private life micromanaged by studio executives who saw him as an investment. Lancaster respected that fear, even as it pained him. He understood that Hudson was fighting a war on two fronts, protecting his career while protecting his heart. And like all wars fought in silence, it could not last. At the same time, Lancaster himself was at the height of his career. His electrifying performance in Elmer Gantry, 1960, won him the Academy Award, proving once again his unmatched range. On screen, he could seduce, manipulate, and command the attention of millions. Off-screen, he returned to the quiet vulnerability of his hidden life with Hudson, cherishing moments of warmth even as he knew they were borrowed. The world, of course, never knew. To the public, Rock Hudson was the ideal man women dreamed of. Lancaster was the strong, uncompromising star. The truth of their connection remained locked away in the shadows, shared only in stolen hours and fleeting journeys. And like all secrets, it was fragile. Eventually, the impossibility of permanence, the knowledge that they could never truly live as they wished, pushed them apart. Not from a lack of affection, but from the sheer weight of denial imposed by their world. Years later, the silence shattered, not through revelation, but through tragedy. In 1985, Rock Hudson's death from AIDS forced Hollywood and the world to confront the reality it had denied for so long. The leading man, the perfect symbol of American masculinity, was finally revealed as someone who had lived under the same masks Lancaster knew too well. His passing was more than the loss of a star, it was a reckoning. Hollywood could no longer pretend. The disease, the stigma, the truth of hidden lives, all of it came crashing into the open. For Lancaster, who had begun to withdraw from public life, Hudson's death was a painful reminder of the price of silence. The tenderness they shared, however brief, became a ghost he carried with him. Hudson is proof that even the strongest masks can crack, and when they do, the truth must be revealed. If this story resonates with you, please help us preserve these hidden stories. Support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing it with your friends, so that more people can discover the untold truths behind Hollywood's golden age. These are not just stories about stars, but also stories of love, fear, and humanity that deserve to be remembered. After the silent pain of Rock Hudson, Lancaster's path crossed with someone else entirely. Not a man hardened by masks and fears, but a boy still learning to be himself. If Hudson was once strong in silence, Ricky Nelson was the light and confusion of youth, a new flame beginning to flicker. The spotlight was on him, Ricky Nelson, the golden boy of American television. Teen idol, heartthrob, the soundtrack of a generation. In the musical The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, he smiled into the camera while letters from thousands of young girls flooded the studio every week. When he took the stage with his guitar, the adoring cheers rose like waves. To the world, he was the epitome of youth, trim, handsome, destined for greatness. Behind the spotlight and the music, however, there was a young man who felt lost, caught between the image imposed on him and the man he was still struggling to become. It was in this restless state that he met Burt Lancaster. To Ricky, the older man was more than a star. He was a paragon of strength, a man who had carved out a place for himself in Hollywood through sheer defiance. Lancaster was no childhood idol. He was a force of nature, someone Ricky admired, respected, and soon yearned for. Standing near him made me feel both protected and alienated. For Ricky Nelson, it was not just infatuation, but the awakening of first love. For Lancaster, the connection was unexpected. He was no longer the hot new guy in The Killers. He was a veteran actor and producer, an Oscar-winning actor and producer, a man audiences saw in complex and conflicted roles. On screen, he played grown men struggling with power and morality. In The Leopard, 1963, a prince confronting the decline of the world, and in The Train, 1964, a resistance leader torn between duty and sacrifice. Off-screen, he found himself dealing with a conflict of his own, the tender devotion of a man nearly 2 decades his junior. Their time together was a mixture of tenderness and disequilibrium. Ricky would sit at the piano, humming softly into the night, his voice as soft as the wind. Lancaster would listen silently, moved by the clarity of his voice, by the way Ricky looked at him with undisguised admiration. To Ricky, Burt is both teacher and lover, a guide through the maze of Hollywood glamour. To Burt, Ricky is the embodiment of innocence, a reminder of who he was before the world taught him to wear a mask. But love, no matter how sweet, doesn't always transcend time. The distance between them is not just years, but worlds. Ricky is still struggling to escape the shadow of childhood fame, still yearning to discover himself beyond the image admired by millions. Lancaster, scarred by past relationships, knows the price of living in silence. Their love flickers, but like a candle in the wind, it never lasts. There are nights when Ricky whispers his dreams of music, of freedom, of being known not as a product, but as a man. Burt listened, his heart heavy, knowing that he could provide shelter, but not forever. Their relationship had nurtured Ricky's courage, but not his search for identity. Lancaster, the practical man, knew before Ricky. This flame, however beautiful, would burn itself out. And so, with the same quiet determination that had marked so many of his secret loves, Lancaster stepped back. He let Ricky find his own path to independence. The separation was not cruel, it was almost fatherly. But it left Burt with a memory that would last longer than the love itself. Years later, when he spoke, he remembered Ricky not as a star, not as an idol, but as the boy who sang like the wind and kissed like he had never been allowed to want. The words captured both the tenderness and the tragedy of their brief time together. For Lancaster, Ricky Nelson was not the greatest love of his life, but he was a reminder of what love felt like before the weight of secrecy crushed it. Raw, undisguised, unforgettable. And now, as we reflect on this secret chapter, the story poses a question for us. If you had to choose, Which of Burt Lancaster's secret loves do you find most compelling? Which one to you is the truest and most beautiful symbol of rejected love? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know which story resonates with you the most and why. The storm came in the form of Marlon Brando. If Rock Hudson was gentle and Ricky Nelson was innocent, Brando was a raw fire. Wild, defiant, unbridled. Their first encounter was not in whispers or secret glances, but in a crowded room, bustling with politics and ambition. It was the late 1950s, a Hollywood fundraiser bustling with activists, artists, and stars. Lancaster, disciplined as ever, spoke with the confidence of a man who believed in order and principle. Brando interrupted him mid-sentence, mocking him with a smirk, his voice sharp, his presence magnetic. The clash drew the attention of the room, two titans at war. But beneath the tension, something deeper was stirring. Between the anger and the fire in their eyes, desire crept in, sudden, undeniable, electric. Brando was the embodiment of rebellion. He flouted rules, ignored interviews, walked barefoot onto the set, and carried himself with a dangerous air that both shocked and charmed Hollywood. Lancaster, by contrast, was disciplined and strong, an acrobat turned screen warrior, a man forged in control. They were contradictions, but their differences did not cancel each other out. They clashed, creating sparks that burned. And so began a love affair, one that was anything but gentle. It was not the quiet safety of beach weekends nor the breeze of youthful devotion. For Brando, it was fire and storm. They argued until their voices broke, only to dissolve hours later in laughter and longing. They challenged each other, pushed each other, pulled each other to places neither dared to go. Lancaster later admitted, almost in amazement, that Brando was the only man who could make me fall with a look. And when Brando's eyes met his own, Lancaster felt both conquered and liberated. During these years, Lancaster's films reflected his inner turmoil. In The Swimmer, 1968, he played a man drifting from pool to pool, desperately searching for meaning in a world that no longer felt like home. The role reflected his own relentless search, his secret passages through the hidden waters of love and identity. On screen, the audience witnessed the alienation. Off-screen, Lancaster lived it, caught between Brando's storm and the silence Hollywood demanded. Their love was a storm, sublime, fierce but unsustainable. Lancaster's discipline clashed with Brando's chaos. Neither could bear the humiliation. What held them together was also what tore them apart. They parted not because of betrayal, but because of the exhaustion of men who fought too hard, loved too recklessly. Lancaster, however, never forgot that memory. Even at the end of his life, he confessed that Brando was the only man who could shatter him with a glance. When Lancaster died in 1994, his passing was quiet. No funeral, no public farewell. His ashes were scattered beneath an oak tree in Westwood Memorial Park, as befits a man whose greatest truths were hidden in the shadows. But his legacy resonates even more than the silence of his death. His films endure, yes, but so does the hidden history of his loves the world rejected. Behind the glitz of Hollywood, behind the masks of its brightest stars, there lived men like Lancaster who carried their truths in silence, but let those truths define them. And that is the lesson he left us. That love, forbidden, suppressed, can still define us. It gives meaning, it creates art, it leaves a mark that no secret can erase. Lancaster's story is not just about an actor, it's about the resilience of the human heart. So as this story closes, let us remember, behind every perfect smile of the golden age of Hollywood, there's a hidden truth. Burt Lancaster's truth is that love, even in silence, always matters. If this journey touches your heart, we ask that you keep it. Please support our channel by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing it with those who deserve to hear these untold stories. Because in remembering them, we honor not just the stars, but every heart that dared to love when the world said they couldn't. Burt Lancaster's life reminds us that behind Hollywood's golden glow were hidden loves and silent battles. From tender moments to stormy passions, his story proves that even secret love shapes who we are. If this touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to keep these untold stories alive. See you in the next videos.